This is the Seahawkers podcast. I'm Brandon Schultz of the Military Seahawkers, and joining me today as we are into draft season, I've got EJ Snyder of Bootleg Football. You can find him out on Twitter at FootballEJ. EJ, it's draft season. You were down at the Shrine game. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm recovering. It was a fantastic week. I really enjoyed it, and it is the kickoff to draft season, running concurrently with the Senior Bowl, and it's the time when 30 NFL franchises right now, not the full 32, are turned on to what's next. The page has turned on their seasons, and that means draft. And so all this content sort of rises to the top, and it is a very good time of year. It's a very busy time of year for us, but as you know, I love it. So it's hammer and tongs, pedal to the metal, but it's good stuff.
Well, I know you love it. I also know that you're really good at it because EJ, I went back to listen to our conversation. We had a conversation about this time last year. Actually, it was, I think, was the Shrine game and the Senior Bowl offset by a week maybe last year? Because it was going on.
They same timing. They ran over each other last year too.
But I think we were focused primarily on people to watch at the Senior Bowl.
Yep.
And there were a couple names that came up in our conversation. The very first guy out of the gate that you said to watch for at the Senior Bowl, Tariq Woolen.
Sometimes blind squirrel finds an acorn. No, he certainly is a match for what Seattle likes. It is, I think, really fortuitous. You don't always get that, right? Sometimes you say, oh, this player is a really good match or a system fit or mentality-wise, I think he'd be great with that coach, whatever it is. And sometimes it happens, but a lot of times it doesn't happen. And so seeing him get drafted, having the season he had, meshing really well with Clint Hurt and Sean Desai, who's getting some defensive coordinator nods around the league now as we're going through coaching interviews. Like it just sometimes the universe converges and you get a really happy scenario like that. And you get a season like Tariq had. Like he had an excellent, awesome rookie season that really put him on the NFL map, and he's going to stay there for years to come.
All right. Since you brought up Sean Desai, former Bears defensive coordinator.
Correct.
The Seahawks, the assistant head coach this year, and assistant. I forget.
He had a funky title.
He had a funky title. Essentially, he was assistant head coach or associate head coach, one of the two. It's like assistant to the regional manager. He had a role with the defense along with Clint Hurt, Pete Carroll, a defensive coach. So we have all these defensive minds in Seattle, and yet, even with Pete Carroll like pounding the table of wanting to stop the run and be that type of team, they got run over by teams this year, EJ. And I don't know where to place the blame. And I suppose you could say, well, it's blame that you can pass around to everybody. Pete Carroll deserves a little bit. Sean Desai deserves a little bit. The Seahawks maybe just weren't all that talented up front. Where do you place the blame?
I'm not big into blame because I'm not in the room, right? Now, if I was in the room and I could see how the players are being instructed, that gives you a better idea of whether or not the players are executing the instruction. Sometimes the instructions are bad, as we all know, or the situational football of like, we made this call in an obvious run situation and we didn't have the guys on the field. Like that's a coaching thing. That's not on the players. So not being behind the scenes, as most of us aren't, I'm not going to be one that's going to sort of put a pin in it and say
that's where I struggle too, because I know that Pete Carroll's a good coach. I mean, that was pretty obvious, because how could he not be a good coach when all the expectations going into the season being that it was going to be and I think you and I had higher expectations than the national perspective, but there was a lot of rankings going into the season that the Seahawks were going to be among the 5 worst teams. They were going to have a top 5 draft pick. And as it turns out, they do. It's just not their own. But also, Sean Desai, I know that you have a lot of respect for him and what he does, and Clint Hurt as well. And so I have a hard time necessarily putting it on the coaches is what leads me to talent. And Pete Carroll at the end of the season saying that they really need to focus on defensive talent. That's where it has me mostly leaning. And
well, there's something funny about that.
Yeah.
It mirrors the Bears situation. Although Sean Desai left the Bears and came to the Hawks, the Bears had a similar situation this year where they invested certainly highly in the draft in the secondary. Two of their top two picks were corner, Kyler Gordon from Washington, and Jaquan Brisker, a corner and a safety. And everybody said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And the back half of that defense was pretty good, was pretty talented. But the front half of that defense, or the front seven, particularly the front four, was not good at all. And the defense suffered greatly because of it. The Seahawks, same thing. They pick a couple of high draft picks, Tariq and Kobe at corner. They obviously have Q at safety. Like, they've got some
Michael
talent.
Jackson had a solid year at
The
corner, so the back
secondary.
half was relatively set, yeah.
And again, Sean Desai comes from the way he came through the ranks. He started as a defensive backs coach, safeties coach, defensive backs coach, passing game coordinator, and then DC. So he really sort of worked his way from the back to the front. And the Seahawks, although they were starting a couple of rookies, had pretty good secondary. However, the front of the defense got run over, and Clint Hurt was the opposite. Clint Hurt is a defensive line, outside linebackers, and inside linebackers coach by trade before becoming a DC. And the Seahawks didn't, for the most part, invest. Now they did grab an edge, and he played okay. But if you're leaning like between the two, because I think Pete really is more the CEO type head coach. Yes, he is a defensive coach by background, and yes, he is an inveterate coach. When you see him out on the field, he is involved. He is giving coaching pointers and whatever else. But in terms of overall, I really think he hands it to his guys for the most part. Of course, if you're the head guy, you can override things. But in the day-to-day, I think he really handed it to Clint and Sean and said, run this thing. And Sean ran the back half with the rookies pretty well. The front half didn't have a ton of talent. They need more talent. That's clear from both the results on the field and what Pete said at the end of the season. And, you guys are going to have to see improvement there if the overall defense is going to come up. Like, that's the area of focus. So
I could see that. And with that focus now being on the front seven, I think going into this draft and this offseason, it makes it really clear where they need to improve. I think it's clear to everybody, and they could use some pieces on the offensive line too. So I can see our discussion kind of focusing in those areas. Now we can wander outside that a little bit because there's some fun positions to talk about too that are outside of the trenches. But I'm curious, before we get into it, what where you're kind of leaning in terms of strength of the draft class, because going back to last year, that's one of the things of how we kicked this off too. And that's going to change, I think, as we go through the combine and through the off season, see some pro day workouts, that sort of thing. But I want to get your sense right now of where you're feeling out the strengths of this class.
Yeah, there are a lot of strengths in this class, which is really cool. Running back class is really strong, which makes me happy in my heart because I love scouting running backs. The tight end class,
when you save all those running backs for the end,
that's right.
That's going to be a good week.
It's going to be a great week. The tight end class is very, very strong. The defensive back class, a lot of people are sort of bagging on it because I don't think it necessarily has that sort of top end stars. But we just saw at both All-Star games, Shrine and Senior, what I would consider some very strong DB play from both games, stronger even than they had last year. So I actually think, under the radar, low key, whatever you want to say, that the defensive back class has a lot of depth. Might not have the highest highs, but both corner and safety have a lot of guys, and it's not just one type. Like last year, I felt like there were a lot of really good nickels, and there were just a few guys like Tariq that I really liked it outside, or less guys. It's a lot of big corners that can really play. We saw a bunch of them in both games, so that's really strong. Wide receiver is strong. I don't think as strong as it has been in past years because it's been historically strong for 2 straight years. Still a very good class. Quarterback is stronger than it was last year, most certainly. Offensive tackle, a little less strong. Still good players, but we had some opt back ins, guys going back to school. Had a couple of injuries. Like, some of the really sort of premier talent that we were hoping to see in that offensive tackle class isn't there. It's really some good players, but not that, a couple of years ago we had that top 4 or 5 OTs that were going to go in the top 15 or 18 overall picks. And it's not that kind of setup this year. Interior offensive line, I like. It's a little bit like defensive back in terms of there's some real star players like John Michael Schmitz at center, but there's a bunch of guys there that are going to play. They're going to get picked in the 3rd and 4th round and going to be the core of NFL offensive lines for a while. And then edge and defensive line has some real strength. Defensive line in particular, depends on how you classify that. If it's only interior defensive line, or if you classify, say, 5 tech as D line, I tend to lot of really good players, some super talented players. Some of the hottest names in this draft are in that group. And then edge is really good too. Will Anderson is headlining that class, but it doesn't stop with him. Got to see some lesser heralded players at Shrine up close, even guys from small schools. That those guys are players. They're gonna make a difference.
Well, let's get into the Shrine game, because you got to spend a week there. You got to interview players down there. You got to watch the drills and really be maybe a part of it. I don't know. How does it compare to your experience in being down in Mobile in the past? Because you've seemed to have made this shift from Mobile to the East West Shrine game. And I feel like in past years too, that more of the premier players would be at the Senior Bowl, but it kind of feels like you're coming away with some guys here at the East West Shrine game that maybe, I don't know if you would say belongs at the other one, or if they're just opting to do this other All-Star game.
Regardless of belonging, there is a shift. There is and you're not the first person to have said that. I talked to a lot of people sort of outside the bubble, people that don't go to the games, that are just sort of consuming them on TV or just through social media. And multiple people have said the same thing. We certainly felt it on the ground, that there used to be a gulf between those two games. Last year, we knew that it was shrinking, but there was still a significant talent gap. But yet the Shrine Bowl class really surprised when it came draft time. We saw they saw their best results ever in terms of most players drafted and players drafted higher than ever before. And then, we saw a lot of rookies with impact. I mean, we've got a Super Bowl team, one of the starting running backs in the Super Bowl is a Shrine Bowl guy, Isaiah Pacheco. We saw Jelani Woods have his moments in Indianapolis. We saw Chigger Conquo have his moments in Tennessee. Lots of guys, Tyquan Thornton, lots of guys from that game ended up having an impact, making rosters and having an impact. And some people kind of said at that point, okay, that's not what I expected from previous years. That's pretty good. I can say from just having spent a week with this next class at Shrine Bowl, it is better in every area. It is crazy. That class was really good. We just talked about how good that class was. This class is better. Wide receivers, better. Quarterback, better. Edge, better. Interior defensive line, better. Corner, definitely better in terms of they have more guys with size and just better overall play. So as good as last year's class was, this class is even better. And, Senior Bowl is always going to get their guys, but many folks I've talked to have said the same thing. That gap is narrowing. And for people who are really paying attention, it's starting to dissolve, because some guys like Zay Flowers, who typically would have been, quote unquote, a Senior Bowl guy, chose to come to the Shrine Bowl this year. And there's a very good possibility he goes in round 1, back end of round 1, but there's a very good possibility he goes in round 1. And I think at that point, there's a sort of leveling, and then next year we'll see. But it is interesting. I did a podcast this morning talking about these two games, and they led off with the same question. And they said, what do you see as the future of these games? Do you see them, sort of ending their competition and being in separate spaces, or how do you think it will flow? I'm not going to pretend to polish up my crystal ball and say, I think this is the way it's going to go. I do continue to see them being closer and closer to even, and they're pretty close to that now, having just spent a week with this talent. There's a lot of really good stuff there.
Well, you brought up Zay Flowers, and as a wide receiver, maybe you've seen my Twitter timeline. He's kind of one of the guys that I've and maybe it's partially due to you and what you've said about him too. But one of the cool stories that I heard from or about him at the East West Shrine Bowl was that he gave up his pads on the first day because another players didn't arrive in time. What was the story there?
We're not sure. We're not sure. So we get to day one. Obviously, much of the buzz about Shrine Bowl was about Zay. He is a premier player. He has been for a while. This is not a one-year wonder. This is a top-tier blue chip talent in the draft. And the idea that he had decided to come to Shrine Bowl was a big deal. A lot of people were focusing on him. Just all angles to that. Even players who were coming to the game, defensive back saying, "I want Zay Flowers. Like I want to man him up. I want to test my mettle against that guy because everybody knows."
And just to paint the picture too for people who don't know, wide receiver, Boston College, and he's not a big wide receiver. He's only 5'10", but real shifty. And so just so you have more of that picture, what 170, 180?
No, he's in the mid 180s.
Okay.
So he's 5'9" and some, closer to 5'10". So a lot of people are like, oh, definitely a slot guy, but makes impact at every level of the field. Explosive plays, deep down the field, very competitive with the ball in the air, extremely shifty. Really, really polished receiver. We got to sit with Zay for a bit, have an interview, and very impressive guy, very impressive player. I think the hype is warranted. So everybody was looking forward to seeing him on the field on the first day, and come out first day. Everybody's sort of getting their feet under, and us included, and no Zay. And so very quickly there's sort of a buzz like, hey, what's up? Is he here? Yeah, he's here. He's been doing interviews. He's definitely here. He's not on the field. What's up? And there was nothing for a while. Then there was the story about, hey, another player's pads didn't show up. And since everybody kind of knows I can play anyways, I decided to give my pads to a different player. We weren't able to sort of verify that, or else there was murmur that it was agent advice saying don't play. If that's the case, it was silly because everybody was there to see you play, and there's different ways to do that. We never really got a definitive answer about what that was. But a guy like Zay, he had to be on the field for some of it. You can't have all the hype and show up and then not play unless you're hurt. He certainly wasn't. But conversely, you can go out, dominate on the first day, and then say, my eyelid hurts, and everybody's going to get it. Everybody's going to go, cool. We saw what we needed to see. Yeah. So the second day, whatever situation is there is resolved, pads or agent or whatever it was on the first day that kept him off the field. And he comes out, and it took about 3 plays. It took about 3 plays of 3 reps of Zay before everybody went, oh yeah. Yeah. That's NFL talent right there. My podcast partner, Brett Coleman, was standing right behind a GM who will remain nameless, who watched about 3 plays and said, oh, yeah, that's different. And so, highlight player came out, did exactly what he was supposed to do. Again, very impressive in interview. It took a while. He was very busy. He was under a lot of requests. Obviously, all the teams were talking to him. All the media wanted to talk to him. Eric made sure we got a shot with him, and it was worth the wait. First interview that's going to come out from that interview series is Zay, and it's actually in my inbox to proof. So it will probably come out tomorrow is my guess, if I get time after this to prove it. But no, Zay, very impressive person, very impressive player. Bottom first, top second round hype is 100% warranted.
So the point is, by the time that this show is out that we're doing, they should go be able to check out that interview and be kind of excited about it as Seahawks fans. Like you're saying, maybe back half of the first round, Seahawks got a pick there.
Yep.
So
could happen.
It could be a need too. Does he play special teams? Can he return punts and kicks?
He can. Yeah, he has return highlights on his tape. He uses that shiftiness, and again, he's not. Some people just want to look at the height and say undersized. When you stand next to him, yeah, he's not tall. Obviously,
Tyler Lockett is very undersized.
It's funny you mentioned Lockett. What is Lockett's size? Like, what's his height and weight?
5'10", and 5'10", probably 170.
Yeah, he's about 178 when he came in. He plays at about mid 180s, and literally Zay Flowers is 5'9". He was like 182 at weigh-ins, or 185 or something. So we had that discussion with that name over the week of practice. We're like, that's Tyler Lockett's size. And like, Tyler Lockett is fine. Tyler Lockett is great.
And he got his start playing special teams and kind of grew into that receiver that he's become, one of the top in the Seahawks franchise. So
there are resemblances. Let's just say that.
Yeah, and Tyler Lockett's not getting any younger. I'm just that's
You're
why
just
my eyes
saying.
are on wide receiver, EJ. I'm throwing it out there.
I do not want Tyler to leave. Tyler's one of my favorite.
Oh, he's
Seahawks.
still got a good 3-4 years at least.
He is one of my favorite Seahawks. I'll just put that out there as a bias.
Mine too. All right. So I'm not trying to put him out of a job. If you're listening, Tyler, I still want you on the team.
Yeah, just to be clear.
Just so we're clear. All right. What are some of the now you do get the opportunity to talk to a lot of guys down there. Who are some guys that stood out, maybe not in terms of their play, but in terms of their personality? And it obviously plays a big factor too, but who jumped out at you in terms of their interview skills or character traits?
Yeah, there's a lot. And we get great access at this game. Great access. Can't thank Eric and his entire staff, really the entire staff at the Shrine Bowl. We've gotten to know them, and they provide us with a unique opportunity to get what I would call more insight into these players. A lot of interviews you'll see from outlets all over the country coming out of places like the Combine. It's really short, right? It's a hold your tape recorder up or your digital recorder up to, somebody's face and where'd you play high school and, what's your favorite route to run and what's your whatever. And that's all you get. Like you get 2 or 3 questions and you get a soundbite. You get 1:30. We get a chance. We get 1 hour slots with each position group. So the way we do it, we can fit about 3 guys in. We do about 15 minutes each, and then there's switching things over and changing batteries and whatever else. So we'll get about 3 solid hours per interview. We get 3 hours per day, 4 straight days. So, and then we can request makeup time if we miss somebody and they were busy doing something else or talking to a team. So we get incredible access to really the entire roster. We get time enough to sit down. We broke down tape with each prospect this year. We took a couple of plays in and said, hey, this is what we see here. Tell us what you see. Tell us about the play call. Tell us about what went right, what went wrong. Fill us in. And that really seemed to put guys at ease because that's what they're there to do is talk football. And it's not, are you a cat or a dog? They hate that stuff. And so do we. Really let them loosen up and understand that we understood football and that we were just there to talk football with them, not to try and, pick flaws or, put them in one light or another. Just let them talk about football. And they really seem to enjoy that. And so we got great interviews. We got about 30 interviews out of that process total. And we'll probably end up publishing about 24, 25 of them. There's some great personalities. I love Kobe Turner. Wake Forest defensive tackle, incredibly smart guy, has a master's in music, describes his work with music, which is extensive. He's already credited with composing and singing, and he has all kinds of credits in the music world, and really says that that's his flip side of the coin from football, from the aggression and the physicality. He goes and gets to sort of concentrate and focus on something mentally that's different. Really his sort of yin and yang. Great interview. It loved our time with Chandler Zavala, who is the left guard from NC State. So he's the guy that played next to Ike Ekwonu last year. If you watched any Ike Ekwonu tape, that left side just bulldozing people, that was Ike and Chandler. And I was like, I knew you from somewhere. Again, very quiet confidence. He's not going to necessarily tell you when you're wrong, but he might just point out that he'd mentioned something like that before.
And he was a guy who could play guard perhaps on both sides, right?
He did. He actually ended up playing guard both sides in practice. And we talked to him specifically about that. When his interview comes out, check that one out, because one of those classic debates in the online world, right, is moving from left to right a huge switch.
Oh, it's a big deal, EJ. I hear it's like wiping with the other hand.
That's the one. Eating with one hand, eating with the other hand, wiping with one hand. That's what you typically hear. And so it does come down to the person. Now, Chandler's take is, doesn't matter. Like, it's not a thing for him. And he honestly says, look, some guys struggle with it. Like, I don't. Like, it's just not a thing, which is fascinating to me. But, great personality with him. Who else? BJ Thompson, who is an edge from Stephen F. Austin. He's a really interesting guy, super athletic, a little raw, but has crazy physical tools and I would say a good round personality, a lot of humor there. A.T. Perry from Wake, the wide receiver, is probably the most impressive football that I've ever gotten to talk to personally. And that's at any level. Like his approach, his detail oriented, the amount of things he considers about his job playing wide receiver and sort of how it's top to bottom. It is exhaustive, comprehensive, whatever, is more meticulous than most players at their position. Really, really impressive football player. And hearing like what his thoughts are, how he approaches each play, each practice, each year, his own skills, the skills of people across from him, that sort of continual assessment of himself within the game and the people he's playing against. Super, super impressive guy.
Can he return punts?
He's not necessarily, I think, a guy you want at returner. Right. The guy you might be looking for is Nico Remigio, Fresno State, formerly of Cal, and formerly of Mater Dei, interestingly, in high school. So he's a Mater Dei grad, Mater Dei high school down in Southern California. Happened to be Brett's alma mater. Also happened to be the quarterback pipeline for USC for like umpteen years. It just seemed like everybody that went to Mater Dei went to USC. But Nico has some return skills for sure. I also think he'll work his way into being a third or fourth wide receiver in the league very, very quickly. Another excellent interview, super well spoken, funny, thorough. Really, really, really liked our interview with him.
And not to take you off of Perry, because even if he can't return punts, I could use a guy who's Cooper Kupp-ish on my team.
I don't think athletically he's going to end up being Cooper Kupp, but in lots of other ways, I think that's a very fair comparison. Cooper is a very good athlete, and dominated at his level of competition. AT's production was not quite at that level, but it was extremely high against great competition, and he's got some very high-end skills. There are other players.
Well, we can scratch him off the list. He can't run a 4.3 is what I'm hearing from you.
He's not a 4.3 guy. He will not run 4.3, and that's okay.
Well, it's fine with me. But
true.
Pete Carroll has this thing about fast wide receivers.
I know.
I don't know if you saw the chart that came out a few weeks ago in terms of wide receiver speed, but the Seahawks were number one. It's because he's drafts guys that are all 4.3 speed guys.
Yeah, he's got
fast.
Bo Melton, Cade Johnson, Tariq Young. Like he likes guys that can absolutely fly. DK, obviously. Sure. That's fine. If that means he's not a Seahawk, that's cool because I have other teams that he could do very, very well on.
Right.
But yeah,
he's not going to. Flowers is still on the list. I feel okay.
Zay,
no, is he not 4.3?
I don't know if he's 4.3. He's low 4.4s for sure.
Maybe he can slip into 4.39.
He could. He's certainly training hard enough to do it. I don't think it's beyond his capability. Yeah. Typically, if you're looking at his tape, I think he's more in the 4.4 range, which is still more than passable. I should put that out there that I think it was Daniel Jeremiah did a study a couple of years ago about the most productive wide receivers in the NFL and what their average 40 time was. It's 4.59.
Yeah,
or 4.55.
Yeah,
and,
yeah, 4.55 for DeAndre Hopkins, one of my favorite receivers. Not a 4.4 guy, not even a 4.5 guy.
It wasn't a 4.5 guy. Yeah. and so it can be done in a lot of different ways. I understand Seahawks like them fast, and there's plenty of fast guys in this draft. And Zay is very fast. Like 4.4 is easily functional speed for the NFL. AT's not going to run that fast. I think he's probably going to run mid 4.5s, and I think that's fine for his game.
All right. Well, let's move over to the defensive line. And you brought up one of the players, Kobe Turner, who's on the interior of the defense. You talked about his personality. How about his play?
Love it. Penetrating 3-tech, one of my favorite players in this draft at that position. Consistent backfield disruption, gets there in multiple ways. Love his tape. If you haven't checked him out, go take a look. But he's not it. Sometimes there's just that one guy, obviously, besides the guys like Jalen Carter, who are at the very top. Maybe there's only, if I wait later, I can only get this one guy. not the case. There's at least 3 of these guys just at the Shrine Bowl. Jerron Cage from Ohio State, also, I think, an underrated disruptor at that sort of 3 tech. Yes, he can slide over to 4-eye and double if he has to, but I think he's got some really good skills moving forward. And then let's see. Desjuan Johnson from Toledo. Maybe not a name you'd know because he played at Toledo. Extremely disruptive player from the inside. Really impressive guy. Love it. He spent a lot of time in the backfield winning reps. And then not necessarily a straight 3, but a guy that definitely screwed up some offensive linemen over the week is Sam Mustipher's brother, PJ, who plays at Penn State. Now, PJ is on the defensive side of the ball, obviously. His brother plays offense. I think PJ might be a little bit better than Sam. He is bigger than Sam, and he was a problem to handle. His trouble in college at Penn State has been injuries, staying healthy. If he's healthy, he is a disruptor. He is a guy that can mess up an offensive line pretty regularly. So keep an eye on PJ as well. There's definitely going to be some questions throughout the process as to health, but healthy, which he was at Shrine Bowl, on the field, that guy can play.
I'm kind of on the fence of whether we should talk about edge, EJ, because you said that it's a strong class, but I look at what the Seahawks have. They went and signed Uchenna Nwosu in free agency. He's coming back. Been a really good player this past year. Really happy about him. Boye Mafe, who they drafted last year. I think he was a guy that we had talked about leading up to the draft. And they have Darrell Taylor still, who registered almost 10 sacks this season.
Yeah, his best season for sure.
And, well, I feel like based on what we saw from him in Tennessee, I feel like there's so much more that he could do on the field, and where he's showing up the most is in the pass rush. But I remember so much of what he did at Tennessee. He was out, covering dudes in the slot and running downfield. And I haven't seen that much from him. I'd like to see a more well-rounded player, and maybe it's just him, in the mid-season that he had due to injury and them trying to figure out a really good role for him. But they tried him in the run game early on, and that was one of the reasons why they got dominated. And toward the end of the season, they found the role for him as a pass rusher, but he just wasn't good enough in the run game to be able to be an every down defensive end or edge player.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That entire assessment that it is about finding guys' roles as they evolve, right? He was not a great edge setter at Tennessee either. That was not the strong suit of his game. He got a pass for that largely in draft circles because boy, he could get after the quarterback, right? Yes. He could mess people up. And the Hawks have they've tried that, right? You see teams bring players in, all teams, not just the Hawks, and say, hey, we want to add this to your game. We want you speed guy to be more of a possession receiver. We want you sack master to be a little bit more of an edge setter. Square pegs, round holes. Mike Gesicki, the tight end in Miami, right? New regime comes in and they're like, hey, we need our tight ends to block. We're used to George Kittle. Gesicki's like, okay, I'll try. Gesicki's not a great blocker. They tried it for about 6 games. Didn't really work. He wasn't great. And they said, we want you to go back to kind of being a big power slot, right? He was like, great, I can do that. And sure enough, he can and does and will. So sometimes you're just like, okay, we talk about NFL position group rooms as like stables, right? Where you want to have one of each, or you want to have a breadth of skill sets, and maybe they just need their heavy, right? They just need their heavy 5. Guy like Dante Stills from West Virginia is a guy I think that can set an edge. He had a really good week. Got to talk to him. Impressive player, very enthusiastic. He can set an edge.
And this is why I bring it up, though, because I felt like they had Boye Mafe coming in and doing that edge setting more on the early downs. And so are we going to find it? And sure, you want depth. And maybe that's why we're going to be talking about later on. And maybe not a guy that they would go for with their first overall pick, for example.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the case, is you are looking at where these guys slot in. The overall value, you can't take everybody in the first round because you don't have all the first round picks. You do need some guys that you can snag middle rounds, later rounds, and say, hey, this guy's role, the way this guy fits in our room, his lock to our key is the ability to set the edge on first and second down as a, and he's got a little bit of pass rush. We can maybe develop that. But what he's coming here for is to make sure that he's the heavy end in our system and that he is doing that thing. If they're going to try and pin and pull around him, he is going to pin more than he's going to get pulled. He's going to be the stick in the mud that doesn't move and causes the run play to go somewhere else. And you need guys like that too. Moro Ajomo is a guy from Texas who played more inside. They tended to play him at 4-eye or sometimes even 3 on passing downs. I really like him at 5. He's up there on 298, I think. And I really like him as just that, a heavy edge setting 5 with some pass rush, but really, look, he played at Texas. He is used to big, stout offensive lines across from him. And I think he's best when he slides out and gets a closer to one-on-one matchup with the tackle, or even with a tight end sometimes if the offense shifts. So he's not going to be a top pick. Is he a really good athlete? Hell yeah. Is he, a very experienced player in a big conference? He is. Is that one of his strengths? It is. It isn't necessarily the sexiest thing. You're not going to hear his name a ton. He's going to be available. It's going to be a good value. He's a very good football player.
Well, we need some good football players, particularly at linebacker. I don't know if you saw our linebacker play, EJ.
Well, again, it comes down to depth. And if you're, I think linebackers come in a couple of flavors, and we're talking about inside linebackers now,
right?
Really not the outside linebackers or edge or whatever you want to call them. It's different.
Did you find the next Bobby Wagner at the Shrine Bowl that the Seahawks can draft?
The next Bobby Wagner.
It shouldn't be easy.
Right. Yeah. Why can't you just grab one of the all-time greats in the NFL every draft? Lots of fan bases think that way. I was impressed with the linebacker core, especially the guys on the Western roster. No discredit to guys on the East. I really felt like the West roster was pretty well stacked. They had 2 linebackers from NC State. Isaiah Moore is the sort of was the higher profile of the 2. Real hammer between the tackles. Guy can absolutely set the box, play the run. But I came away, I don't want to say more impressed, but differently impressed by his running mate, Drake Thomas. A little bit smaller, plays the pass pretty well, is incredibly rocked up. So he is not a tall guy, but he is doing every possible bit with the frame he has. And that's a lot. And he made a bunch of plays throughout the week. And he's one of the guys I kind of put a check mark next to and went, okay, I looked at Isaiah Moore a little bit more. I need to go look at Drake Thomas a little bit more because there's something there. And when you look at these guys, classic example is Matt Milano from Buffalo. Now, I don't think Drake Thomas is quite as good against the pass as Milano is, but there are some similarities to his game in terms of size, in terms of how he plays, in terms of the fact that he's being overlooked right now, and he's probably going to be a value. On the other end of things, Shaka Hayward from Duke, who, yes, is related to the NFL Haywards, but is not a small guy. He's 6'3", about 242. One of my favorite things about him is playing with balance. He approaches whether it's pass coverage or whether it's coming up to break down on a running back that's coming towards him, always plays over his toes. Hips balanced, shoulders balanced, is not a guy you see lunging. A lot of times tall guys you see sort of lunging and reaching. Just plays with great balance. Obviously, big guy, can get in the passing lane as well. Good speed, like Shaka Hayward quite a bit. And then
I would settle for a KJ Wright, EJ. It doesn't have to be Bobby Wagner.
Some of these guys could be KJ Wright, and KJ is a great player. I think there's some talent here. Charlie Thomas is a guy I like from Georgia Tech. He had a sort of up and down week. I love his athletic gifts. Still needs to figure some things out. But again, if you've got a linebackers coach that wants to work with somebody that is very coachable and has a lot more to give, Charlie Thomas is going to be available later on. And man, he's an athlete. He's a pretty good linebacker too, but he's a very good athlete.
Well, I think we have a few names then at linebacker. I want to go back to the defensive line because you were talking about some of the guys, Will Anderson being there in the top 5, Jalen Carter being there in the top 5. There were some people that after his performance in the bowl game or in the bowl games weren't quite as high on Carter. Is he gonna suffer at all because of that?
I doubt it.
Yeah.
I doubt it. I don't want to call him generational. That word gets overused. Generational means roughly once every 20 years. Obviously, we've seen some very talented interior defensive linemen. I'd say he's about a once in a 5-year guy. He has incredible size. His physical gifts are unmatched, and he's got production. Like I was talking about Jalen Carter last year, like that incredible defensive line at Georgia, obviously very high profile. Most of them ended up in the pros, high draft picks. And it was still, when you watched that defensive line, it was like, who's 88, man? Like, and everybody's like, that's the guy next year. That's Jalen Carter. Like this defensive line, and that guy might be the most talented. All those guys are high draft picks. Everybody was talking about Jalen Carter. So if he come out last year, he would have been a top 5 pick. Comes out this year, probably still going to be a top 5 pick. He didn't go anywhere. Now, you know how the draft process works. As this drones on, there will be increased scrutiny, especially to guys going that high, and they will want to find flaws, right? They will want to pick things and just cut that game down. There's a lot of reasons why that occurs. It always occurs. It is a very regular feature of this process. Jalen Carter, when you look at his tape, you look at the athletic testing he's going to put up at the combine, there is no reason not to pick that guy in the top 5. All players have flaws, even the very high blue chip players that are coming out from college. They all have stuff to work on. Would any defensive line coach, and I mean any defensive line coach, despite what you're going to hear, because it's going to get to silly season, they're going to be like, oh, I don't like that guy. I don't even think he's in the top 20, right? Because people are trying to drive down value or do whatever else. Every single defensive line coach in the NFL, if you handed him Jalen Carter, would be like, hey, man, thanks. You just made my job a lot easier. That guy's going to make me look really good.
Because I think what I'm counting on, EJ, is that the Bears, with the first pick overall, they're going to find a way to screw things up, like the Jaguars. Like Aiden Hutchinson should have went first overall. The Jaguars decide to take Trayvon Walker instead, and the Lions get Hutchinson. Can the Bears screw up that top pick so that maybe Carter falls to the Seahawks?
No.
Dang it.
No, they can't screw up quite that badly. They are probably going to trade out of the top pick. Probably means they're going to be somewhere down in the 4 to 6 range. Probably may still have a shot.
Should the Seahawks trade up to the number 1 pick with the Bears
to get Jalen Carter? Yikes! That would be a lot of commitment. That would be a John Snyder move. Now, again, the quarterback debate's really funny. Again, parallels between Seattle and Chicago. Both guys had decent seasons. Geno had an amazing season. And people are like, oh, we want to replace him. And I'm like, why? You're just hoping to roll the dice and get what you already have. Like, if Bryce Young came out and played like Geno did this year, it would be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, rookie season in history. It would be better than Justin Herbert's rookie season, which was the greatest rookie season in history as far as quarterbacks go. You're hoping that maybe you get that by trading up and using all those assets when the guy just did it for you. Now, will Geno regress some? Sure, he is a regression candidate a little bit, but he has shown to be, I think, everything the Seahawks want. All this talk about moving on from Geno reminds me of all the talk in Chicago. People are like, oh, you should move on from Justin Fields. And I'm like, Justin Fields did not play anywhere near as well as Geno. We understand that. Did he play exceptionally well given the circumstances? Yeah, he did. Will he look different with some offensive line talent, some receivers to throw to? Yeah, he will. But
so you would trade for Geno Smith? Eh?
I would love Geno Smith as a Bear. That'd be awesome. But I don't think they need to give up anything because I really like Justin. And I believe that, again, given a functional NFL surrounding cast, which Ryan Poles removed on purpose, right? He had to cut all that fat off the books because the way Ryan Pace, his predecessor, had run that organization, there wasn't anything left. They were in cap hell and they didn't have any talent. Everything was aging. That's why they traded, all the good players, cut all the contracts, even the one that cost them money this year. They put everything on the books this year so that they can come out with $100 million in cap space.
So Justin Fields needs a center. The Bears stay at number 1, take the top center off the board. Who is it?
John Michael Schmitz. Like,
You mentioned
knock down easy. Would I pick him at number 1 overall? I would not. Would I pick him anywhere from about 15 on down? I would. That guy is going to play 7 or 8 years in the league. Everybody's like, oh, you should say he's a 10-year starter. I need to remind people how rare 10-year starters are in the NFL. They're like hen's teeth. There are very, very few of them. If you play 7 or 8 years at a high level in the NFL as a rookie coming in, that's a tremendous career. John Michael Schmitz looks primed to do that. He looked primed to do that last year. He decided to go back for another year, came out, went down to the Senior Bowl, just kicked the hell out of everybody. Like, he looks every bit that part of a guy that is going to come in. Now, again, he's probably going to be drafted bottom third of the first round because that's just positional value. People don't.
That's where centers go.
But it's incredibly safe, right? They have one of the highest hit rates, if not the highest hit rate in the first round, interior offensive linemen. So just a very safe pick. I would love it if he ended up in navy and orange. Not at number 1, of course. Don't think that's the best use of resources. But if he ends up being a center for the Bears, which is possible, I would love it. They would have their pivot to work the rest of the line around for a long time.
No, you'd be passing up some crazy talent, obviously, to take him at number 1. But no, I was more considering him maybe around the 20 range with the Seahawks pick, even though I've had my heart broken in the past in terms of centers. It's like guys with over 4.3 speed. I feel like Pete Carroll just doesn't care about center in the way that he cares about slow receivers.
Probably not. He doesn't. It is great. We have seen, Creed Humphrey, who was a guy bang the table for the Bears to draft, goes to what was a very rough KC line the year before. They were down in the mid-20s in terms of their overall effectiveness grade. Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith come in, 2 rookies, and transform that line. Obviously, they went and got free agents as well, which is exactly what the Bears are going to do. Center can have a transformative effect on an offensive line. Getting a rock solid, very smart, very experienced center is a big deal.
I know, and I don't know why.
I know you know,
but I want it, and maybe this is the year. Maybe this is the year. Although I am curious to get your take on this particular debate. Say Bijan Robinson or Zay Flowers are both there in the late teens or early 20s. Who do you take for your offense? And say maybe you do have a running back in the backfield in Ken Walker. Would you still? How would that weigh into your decision between those 2 players?
It would. It has to. Kenneth Walker, as you well know, was my top-rated back last year. Love him. Love the player. I think folks in Seattle got to see why I was so excited about him. He showed out as a rookie. It has to figure in. People say best player available. The answer is best player available for the situation you're in. And the situation the Seahawks are in, they have a very good young running back under contract for the next 4 to 5 years, depending on whether or not they use the 5th-year option on him. And, that has to figure in. If you're doing it purely agnostic of team, and you're saying, is Bijan a better player than Kenneth Walker? Yes, I'm going to have a higher grade on Bijan Robinson. He is probably the best running back entering the league since Saquon in terms of pure physical skill and production and everything. He's a great player. I've seen him live. He's a great player. That's it. He's a great player. He's going to be a great player. It's going to his game's going to translate very well to the pros. And that's great. But do you double up and have 2 great, potentially number 1 running backs? Only if you're a team that literally is not going to throw the ball. Like, that doesn't make it.
Isn't Robinson really solid at catching the ball too?
He is. He's a very, very solid pass catcher. And I think Kenneth Walker is an underrated pass catcher. I thought that coming out of Michigan State, that he had those skills. He wasn't asked to use them in college, but you saw in the few receptions he had there, man, he's a high level pass catcher. He's a hands catcher. Great player. Said so at that time. So, it's sort of the old SAT question, right? Is Kenneth Walker is to Bijan Robinson as X is to Zay Flowers on the Seahawks roster. And typically that's probably going to be wide receiver 3. So is wide receiver 3 on the Seahawks better than Zay, or is running back 1 better than Bijan or by how much, right?
Yeah,
And that's
this will be on the SATs.
That's right. That's the value question for all the I'm sorry for costing you all the listeners. Everybody that was like, "Oh, test anxiety. I'm not doing it." The answer there for me, if I'm a general manager, would most likely be Zay. I think Zay is better than your wide receiver 3 in a different way than Bijan is some small measure better than Kenneth Walker because they're both excellent running backs. So overall improvement to the team, I think, would be greater with a guy like Zay. But look, if you're John Schneider and you're just absolutely hooked on the fact that you want that talent on your team for multiple reasons because you don't find them like that very often, and that's the tier or the stratosphere that Bijan's in. You just don't find him like that very often. He could, but that means you're sort of splitting time with Bijan and Kenneth Walker. There's no bad answer for the offense, but
Well, and I think that was part of the thing going, and the reason why I'm intrigued by the debate around this is because you went into the season with Rashad Penny and thinking you're going to split time with Penny and Walker. Now Penny got injured again. We see injuries at the running back spot every year,
yes,
all over the NFL. It's not just the Seahawks thing, but we've seen it a lot with Seattle. Wouldn't hurt to have another healthy guy who's really, really good. And I see around the NFL, we talk about positional value, running back being devalued to the point where your top running back went toward the top of the second round. You still had people banging the table over, oh, you don't take a running back that early. And yes, you say he's the best since Saquon. If he's there in the 20s, that seems like you want to get the jump on some other teams. Maybe a good spot to take him if he's there. Maybe somebody goes Christian McCaffrey and takes him in the top 10. I don't know.
I don't think so this year because the other thing is, if I think you're right about all the things you said. Injury rates really high, happens all the time, not just Seahawks thing. It's very good to have another back there. My follow-up question to that is, oh yeah, but where can you get such a player? And the answer is all through the draft. Like
Right.
you can get a 5th rounder, including some of the guys that are in the Seahawks backfield right now, who are also good players, who we are not mentioning, who are very solid and played well when called upon.
Right.
Can you also do that to back up with Kenneth Walker? Can you get a guy like Jordan Mims from Fresno State, who I think was the top back at Shrine, who is a very good 3-tool player? He runs the ball very well. He catches the ball, I would say, functionally or better, and he's a very good pass protector. He's the best pass protector of the week, which is very important. You want to keep Chino upright. Folks who listen to your show who are also fans of Wazoo, of which I imagine there are many, will know Jordan Mims very well because he destroyed them in the bowl game. He ended up with over 200 yards, almost 11.9 per rush, 2 touchdowns in his final game against Wazoo. They'll remember, yeah, that's that guy. He would look very good playing for the Seahawks.
I like that you gave me alternatives because I think we have enough players from the University of Texas on the Seahawks already. And
are you not a Texas guy?
I'm an Oklahoma guy. We're bred to
Sorry,
not.
I didn't know. It's I apologize. I didn't know you were a Sooner.
Well, the thing we don't bring it up because I like defense. Oklahoma, their teams don't play defense, so we end up not talking a whole lot of Oklahoma football. EJ,
Tommy Harris. I'm just saying, Tommy Harris.
Right? We got a guy.
You had a guy.
Oh,
you had a guy. Anyways, look him up. Tommy Harris. He was a Bear.
Well, Creed Humphrey was my guy, and then
Creed Humphrey's great. And you got a punter this year who, strangely enough, is related to a longtime NFL punter, and I didn't make the connection. So Matt Turk, Turk.
Okay.
And I was, for some reason, didn't make the connection between the last name Turk.
Not a whole lot of Turks in the NFL.
Yeah. Anyways, he is the nephew of a longtime NFL punter, and he can bomb it. Like, that guy is legit. Like, regardless of jokes about specialists, the punter from Oklahoma can absolutely destroy the ball. We're talking like 5.2, 5.3 hang times. Like, that's
got our special teams dudes locked up, except for punt returner, which is
right. Okay. Well, there's a lot of options.
That's good. All right, EJ, I want to thank you for coming on. I know you are getting into your busy season. I know that you've got a lot going on, and so I always appreciate you coming on and breaking things down. Now, before we go, I did want to ask you, because we got into it a little bit with the top 5. The Seahawks have that 5th overall pick. I don't know if they're going to trade with the Bears. Probably not. But if they stay there at 5, I feel like I like to pay attention to some of the mock drafts before the combine hits because I don't know. You look at some of them and they seem to be more indicative of maybe the players. Everybody's going off at tape. It's only tape. There's no measurables yet, and you're seeing a couple quarterbacks in that top 5. You're seeing Jalen Carter. You're seeing Will Robinson, and I don't know who's going to be left to really have a draft crush on there at number 5.
Yeah, it's interesting because it does depend a lot on movement. Without movement, it's one thing. You can sort of predict them as they sit now, but that's not likely what's going to occur. Bears will most likely trade out of that top spot. It will be for a team looking for a quarterback. I don't believe any team's going to trade in a number 1 for a non-quarterback. And then the fun starts. Then it's okay. Does the next team that needs a quarterback, do they go up and jump? Because there's pretty strong belief that D'Amico Ryan's new head coach of the Texans may not pick a quarterback with that spot.
Oh, interesting.
So then the fun starts. Then all the intrigue starts about who might jump up. Well, if they know he's not going to, do they wait and trade with 3 because it's cheaper, obviously? So you could see some of those players that are being mocked consistently right now in the top 5 falling to 5 or 6 if the one that you always want is mocked at 4. Will Anderson would be a really nice fit in a couple of ways. Seahawks can always use more pass rush. He is an excellent player. He would have been the number 1 overall player drafted if he left last year. If he left Alabama after last year, there were talks he should have won the Heisman. I think he should have. Just by definition, if you're talking about the best player in college football, nobody was better at their job in college football last year than Will Anderson. So should have won the Heisman, would have been the number 1 overall presumptive pick in the draft, especially in a weak quarterback class last year. Still a great player. People are like, oh, he fell off. He didn't fall off. He just didn't hit the stratospheric heights that he hit the year before. Very, very good football player at a position of need, at a very high draft value. It is a position you would spend a top 5 pick on. Edge rush, who is extremely talented. Yes, it lines up. Need, fits for value. I would say if they stay, if they don't end up moving, and we all know John Schneider likes to move, and Anderson's there, it's kind of a run the card to the podium thing. Just do it because he's going to make your team better. He is going to threaten quarterbacks. He's going to make guys like Boye and Mafe look better because they're going to get more single teams. Is their preference maybe inside pressure? Guy like Jalen Carter or another, pass rushing 3 tech. I don't know that anybody in that role besides Jalen, if he's off the board, which presumably he will be, is better at their job or really at football than Will Anderson. Like he's a ridiculously good football player. It could line up. He could end up playing in Pacific Northwest. If he does, I will come see him because he is worth the popcorn, man.
So you're saying I need to root for craziness at the top.
Yes.
So that he falls to 5.
You need chaos. Chaos is good. Chaos is good for me too, because it might mean the Bears trade down twice, right? If they do that, if they were able to trade to 4 and then they were able to trade again, I realize it's a very difficult thing to do and it takes 2 to 10.
The Seahawks could make the move from 5 to 4 then.
They could if they needed to, if John Schneider was and his staff were locked in that they
I know people think that those 1 spot moves are kind of silly. But there is
not value. If you get a guy like Will Anderson and he plays well. It's only any of the moves are silly if they don't work out. Yeah. Like everybody will lampoon a move where it feels like you got fleeced or the guy ended up being a bust. All these things. If you pay literally anything in the draft and the guy ends up being a true blue chip player, all pro type player in the NFL, nobody cares what it costs. Nobody even remembers. Like they're just like that guy goes out and gets 10, 11 sacks a year, 12 sacks a year. He led the NFL in sacks, whatever, which is the potential you're looking for out of an edge rusher that's drafted in the top 10. If he goes out and does that, if he lives up to that hype, nobody cares.
Yeah. I was going to go back to Mitch Trubisky, but I won't do that to you.
You can. It's a very good example, in fact, of, that was in terms of even that year, that was one of the most economical trades made. People say, they only moved to 1 spot. They didn't pay a lot for it. Teams that moved, a lot more paid way, way, way more, but their quarterbacks worked out.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter. Nobody cares. But if you spent even a little bit and the player doesn't turn out to be as perceived, especially the higher you go, the greater that pressure is, that you're going to have a problem. Doesn't matter how much of it, you cannot argue that the Mitch Trubisky trade was economical with anyone because they don't care. He busted, and that's that.
That's that. He's EJ Snyder at Football EJ out on Twitter. You've mentioned some of the interviews you have coming up on Bootleg Football. Where do people go to find it and tune in? If they should be there already. Let's be honest.
Yeah, check out Bootleg Football on YouTube. That's all you need to do. Go to YouTube, type in Bootleg Football. If you are a audio podcast person, we're available on all those platforms as well. Same thing. Search for Bootleg Football. For draft season, we will have a weekly podcast, just sort of summing up most of the things we're seeing and doing. We will be releasing at least 2 of those interviews per week because we have so many of them that there's only, I think, 10 weeks between now and the draft, or 11. And that means 2 a week plus a couple of bonus weeks to fit them all in. And then in addition to this year that we did not have last year, we'll be going to some pro days. So we're going to try and make some swings. Pro days are when schools basically host all of the NFL scouts and run their own little version of a combine. Going to try and do a Northwest swing, probably UW, hopefully U of O, maybe OSU, sort of do the I-5 corridor, do a small cluster of schools, maybe USC, UCLA, and another school down in Southern California by Brett. And then we got a couple of schools farther back east that are fairly high profile. And if they say we can come, we might make a special trip out there to go to their pro day, because obviously they have some very sought after draft prospects who folks will know the name of. So we'll sort of keep you up to date on all that. But check out Bootleg Football on YouTube. You'll see it all there.
Well, we'll be looking forward to it. And yes, if you are an audio-only listener, you missed out on EJ's outstanding lighting setup. He's got the blue, he's got the green. You got to check it out on video. And
we aim to please.
Probably shouldn't be mentioning here at the end because you've already listened this far, but you missed out. Sorry.
That's okay. They'll go back. They'll double view it.
That's what we want. YouTube.com/Seahawkers podcast. Follow the show. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawkers Pod. And EJ, thanks once again for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always a blast, Brandon.
And with that, there's only one thing left to say. Go Hawks.